looking forward to today and discussing Aditxt. Just as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded today, April 14th, 2022. And we have Amro Albanna, the CEO and founder of Aditxt.
I really do appreciate you joining. Thank you for your time. What I do, maybe I just as a quick intro, I invited Jason Kolbert, who is the head analyst from Dawson James. He will introduce himself. And just for full disclosure, Jason works for Dawson James, which is the bank that took us public back in July or June 2020. 2020. So that's just for full disclosure. We will not be discussing his coverage. He has been following Aditxt. We will not be discussing his rating, whether it's buy, sell, or hold. Those are the the recommendation that Jason does, but I do not get involved with those recommendations, obviously, one way or another. We will stick to publicly available information. And the reason I invited Jason to moderate this, I have had multiple discussions, as you can imagine, with Jason in the past. And I truly felt that he would add good value in terms of even representing what investors should be asking. He understands the company because he has been following us, and there is nothing scripted. Jason will ask whatever questions he normally would ask me, again, based on publicly available information. What I would like to do is to remind and probably for first timers, share with everyone what Aditxt is all about, why we are uniquely positioned when it comes to developing new technologies related to immune health. Number two, what it is that you should be looking for in 2022, our focus on revenues. And number three, how are we going to get there? What is the path? What is our strategic plan to execute on that goal for 2022? And finally, our progress as we shared publicly with a couple announcements as far as achieving that goal for revenues in 2022. After that, Alyssa will come on again and will begin asking the questions that were submitted. I'm not sure what the deadline was, Alyssa, but we'll take those questions and we will begin answering them. So, excuse me, that's a little bit of the agenda. Jason, how are you?
Good, thank you. How are you? Please forgive my lateness.
Not at all. We truly appreciate you joining us. And Jason, I took advantage of this time. I actually did a quick intro. I already shared with them some of the housekeeping items as far as your relationship with Dawson, Dawson taking us public, the fact that we won't discuss, of course, your coverage, and we will stick to publicly available information. And I also shared with our group here that I really couldn't find a better person for you to come in. You understand the story. You have been interviewing me and you understand the industry. And I thought, it would be really good for you to ask questions, even on behalf of investors, no script. So this is
great. Thank you.
And that's the intro I did. So
first of all, my pleasure to do this. I think this is the future, by the way, of research, which is not a canned presentation, but one where you have an analyst, someone familiar with the company, asking questions. It's true, Dawson James took you public. Everybody in the audience should factor that in. However, I will tell you, I will never misrate a stock. I will never not ask tough questions to a management team. The Chinese wall, in case you don't know it, is the wall that separates banking and research. And I have to tell you, it's really a serious concern at brokerage firms. And so there is, at Dawson James, at the firms I've worked at, there's no monkey business about that wall. So I'm free. I'm a free agent to cover what I want to cover. Of course, I want to cover companies that I like, that I believe in, where I think the technology is paradigm shifting. And, in part, that's where I came to meet Amro and Aditxt. What I didn't expect to happen was COVID. And COVID really changed a lot of things for a lot of people. We've all, experienced COVID in some way, shape, or form. Hopefully you didn't have COVID. I did. And actually I did believe it or not, I got COVID 3 times. And one of the things I wondered after getting COVID is whether I was immune to it, particularly after I was vaccinated. A COVID test is a binary test. It tells you you have COVID or you don't have COVID. It doesn't really tell you much more than that. It'd be really interesting to get vaccinated and then get tested and determine what your antibody level status is. And I was particularly interested in this because, and it's a very long story, but I have a low hereditary IgG deficiency. Immunoglobulin G is the IgG, it's the immunoglobulin that helps prevent things like sinus infections. So I wondered, does that make me more susceptible to Aditxt? So I reached out to Amro and I requested an Aditxt score. And it was a fascinating experience. It was in the very early days. I drew the blood myself. We were all, restricted at home. Not as easy as it looks to do, drawing the blood yourself, that is, but putting it in the envelope and FedExing it back, and literally, a day or two later, getting results that showed me I had robust immunity, which really explains why my second and third positive tests for COVID, I was asymptomatic. So, clearly the immunity I had was working to keep me from getting sick. And so that really raised my awareness of the need, right, to better understand not just whether you have COVID or you don't, but what is your immune status? If you're a cancer patient, what is your immune status? How much chemotherapy can you withstand? Where your immune system, is not any one thing, it's multiple things. So Aditxt was one of the first companies that I'd come across that was looking beyond just COVID testing and looking at qualitative detail in terms of what it means to be immune. And I saw tremendous value in that. And interestingly enough, I saw value in some other companies that were around COVID testing. The problem now is with COVID testing, I don't want to say going away, but the need is clearly going down. But the need to understand our immunity to COVID hasn't changed. And so that's why I think Aditxt, fundamentally, philosophically, as an analyst, that's part of what attracted me to the story. Another element, and I'm sure, Amro, we're going to get into this, is the notion of immune tolerance. For those of you who know me, and by the way, if you're interested in the Dawson James research, just go to www.dawsonjames.com. So you can see all of the research on all of the companies I cover, including Aditxt, just by going to our website. So if you were to do that, you'd see that I cover a number of stem cell companies too. And the stem cell companies, part of the early promise of stem cells was immune tolerance, that people could get a kidney transplant, a liver transplant, and maybe reduce the burden of immunosuppressive agents like cyclosporin, tacrolimus, which is a brutal daily regime that patients have to take. And so when I saw that Amro was also kind of looking in those directions, I got very interested in what he was doing. And of course, Amro, I'm sure we're going to get into what the acquisition status of the company is and kind of the idea of a full spectrum company from diagnostics to therapeutics. But for everybody, that's my background. And I guess, Amro, how much have you explained kind of what the company is, and what did I leave out in my explanation?
This is a great introduction, Jason. Thank you very much. I mean, you really teed me up here. You touched on it, and we really try to have these live webinars as often as we can. We are a nano cap company. We are a speculative stock that comes with its own dynamics. It's really important for us to continue sharing with our shareholders and potential shareholders who we are. So let me just follow up quickly on your introduction. If you look at the immune health and you look at immune health in general, we've been talking about precision medicine for the past couple decades, for the past 20 years, not us, just the medical community and the scientific community. But what is really precision medicine? We believe you cannot begin to address precision medicine without precision diagnostics or precision mapping of the immune system. They truly go hand in hand. That makes our story a bit more difficult, frankly, because it's, part of it diagnostics, part of it therapeutics. But we believe this is the future when it comes to biology, when it comes to immunology, where we have to have a true understanding with very high precision of our immune status, our dynamic immune status for a specific application, followed by therapeutics that take that data, that knowledge, and begin to treat the immune system with that same level of precision. So that's Aditxt, the mapping of the immune system and the reprogramming of the immune system. We'll talk about the acquisitions here in a second, and which addresses really the pathogen side, the disease-causing agent side. But we started Aditxt with that foundation of Aditxt core being the immune mapping and the therapeutics, which is the immune modulation. And that's who we are as a company. And we believe it is the future of medicine and the way to truly adopt a precision approach to our health.
Good. And so in terms of the diagnostics business, one of the things that people do ask me, investors ask me about, and I wonder about myself, I always wonder about two things when I'm following a microcap company. How much cash do they have? What are they burning? And do they have any revenues? And so I'd like to, maybe you can answer the cash and burn rate in the end of your answer, but in the beginning of your answer, help me understand what you're thinking in terms of commercialization. And part of the impetus for the question is there almost seemed like a window that was open and that was going to close around COVID. However, I say it almost seemed that way because acute testing, I think, has already changed dramatically in a year to rapid at-home point-of-care testing. If you test positive, you probably see a doctor, and then you get a more definitive lab test. But the need for immune testing, not only around COVID, but around everything else, I mean, from flu and other respiratory viruses, and we talked about cancer. So you clearly have been making attempts at working with partners and driving a commercial infrastructure with an eye towards revenues. Talk with me a little bit about what you're thinking, where you're at, and where you think you might be over the next 5 years with that business.
Great, Jason. All right. So I actually, I'm also kind of looking at the chat box here because one of the questions was about the cash burn and dilution and money raising. So to kind of give you that high level overview and shareholders, we founded the company September 2017. The first 2.5, 3 years, we focused on putting the company together, forming the company and taking it public on NASDAQ July or June 2020. So we've been public for just a little less than 2 years. And, this is something you are certainly more familiar with. I'm not sure how many biotech companies, especially therapeutics, how long it takes them before they even use the word, the R word, revenue. Since we took it public in the last 18 to 20 months, I've been focused on transitioning the company from a great story to growth story in the last 20 months, starting with Aditxt core, because therapeutics will get into the business model. It's a little different business model. But therapeutics, since we went public, we managed to get Aditxt core Immune Monitoring Center in Richmond, Virginia. and that was operational in July last year, 2021. We managed to get it certified by CLIA and CAP, which is the regulatory body that we need to operate under in order for us to perform what we call lab developed tests. We started working on insurance reimbursement strategies to understand private and public insurance, including Medicare. We became licensed Medicare provider. And then we began working on securing channel partners where we can sell our Aditxt score through their distribution channels like hospitals, labs that use us as reference lab, employers, and other channels. And now with today's announcement about Guthy-Renker, we wanted to take everything that we've developed, operational center, regulatory certifications, insurance strategy, established channel partners. And the question for us, and the question I get as well, how do you grow this? How do you grow this business? And with Guthy-Renker and their background in marketing and distributions and the ability to get consumer awareness, now we can begin to have that strategy in place for 2022, where we can go from X number of providers that we have today to multiple, whatever that multiple is. So we are focused on revenues, which I believe, again, in biotech is pretty quick. As far as cash burn, look, we just filed our 10K. Obviously, people can go and see our cash burn. We are still a young company. We roughly raised $45 million in total, give or take. But look at how we use the money. Aditxt score up and running, operational. We're focused on revenues, as I just discussed. On the therapeutic side, we have one program that's moving towards clinic, pending regulatory approval with psoriasis. We have another program, the type 1 diabetes, that will follow psoriasis, and then followed by skin allograft as a proof of concept in organ transplantation. And right now, we're still in exploratory stage with multiple sclerosis. When you look at both sides, diagnostics, which is operationally intensive, and therapeutics, which requires a lot of capital, you can see how resourceful we have been in terms of dilution. So far, we have about 44 million outstanding shares. And in terms of capital raise, which again, we only raised about 45 million today. Will we need the money? Yes, we will need to raise additional capital, of course, to get us to that next inflection point.
Just remind me, what was the number reported on the 10K for cash balance? The cash and equivalence number.
Jason, I believe it was, and again, I gotta check. It was somewhere almost either 5 or 8, but I gotta look really quickly on the.
Okay, and pro forma today, is that number higher or lower?
You mean what we have today?
Yes.
We have not shared that. I mean, we'll do that in Q1, which is coming up soon here.
Okay. Has any money been raised over the first quarter?
We have not raised money. No.
Okay. All right. So we can calculate that. What's interesting too is that the burn rate last year was very, very modest. I haven't updated for the fourth quarter. I have to go check the 10K, but I had you at around a 6.5 million operational burn, which is not bad. Does that sound right to you?
It does, Jason. Again, I will have to look back, but it isn't. I mean, again, if you look at some of the comps we have, and they're public comps. When you look at therapeutics, for example, in immune modulation, you've seen some.
But I want to interrupt you. I don't want to look at comps. I just want to fish out these cash numbers, because what I'm trying to get to, right? I'd rather be upfront and open with people, which is my read is you have about a year plus or minus of operating cash until you have to raise capital again or something else happens. Acquisition, partner, non-dilutive capital is brought into the company, but it's not like the commercial business is going to ramp up and throw out free cash flow in 2022, although it could, couldn't it?
Yeah, I want to be careful again. We're not making any guidance on cash. The company will need to raise cash. and we're really not making any guidance as far as profitability.
But you forgive me, right? I'm just being an analyst.
Yeah. Well,
so I'm going to put.
Go ahead.
I'm going to push this just a little bit more, which is, as an investor, I know you have to raise cash. As an analyst, everybody should know at some point you'll raise cash. The key question is, one, will you do, a good deal or a bad deal? What's the difference? A bad deal ends up being one that's excessively dilutive. A good deal is one that's pretty tight. We'll call it at the market, or in the best case, even at a premium. How do you get a good deal done? Well, you get it done around a catalyst or an event that, people really applaud, and it essentially creates a positive inflection point for the stock to rise. And I'm wondering if commercial success represents that kind of catalyst. It could, right? If we start to see a hockey stick ramp in Aditxt sales in 2022. Initially, when we had, way back a couple of years ago, when we talked about Aditxt and we built the model, my hope was to see a hockey stick style ramp in 2022. Like everything in the world, everything got delayed in the last 2 years. But where are we in terms of the ramp? And I know you're not going to give guidance for next year, but I want to ask you, in the year 2030, what do you think your diagnostics business revenue should be?
Jason, I always shy away from, giving guidance even that far ahead. But let me give you some data points, so at least we're, some of the data points that I can share. Number one, 2022, we do want to see ramp up in revenues.
Good.
That I said that publicly. We are pushing every aspect of the company when it comes to Aditxt Core to actually ramp up revenue. So what does that mean? That means us understanding our capacity in terms of machines, us understanding how many shifts it will take, us understanding how many channel partners it will require, what that will look like in terms of marketing campaign. And I can tell you, this is something that is in our DNA right now, focus on revenues and how we can show Aditxt Core going from 0 to X in a very meaningful way. That's our goal for 2022, not 2023, but for 2022. And as we begin talking about Q1 numbers and Q2 numbers and Q3 and Q4, again, our goal, certainly cannot guarantee it, but our goal is to begin telling not only revenue story, but revenue and growth story. Now that COVID is settling down a little bit, COVID is not going to go away, and I borrowed that from you. And COVID-19 actually created an amazing awareness for Aditxt Core as a product, because now it's not about only PCR and antigen testing. After 2 years of COVID, whether you've been infected, whether you had vaccination, whether you had boosters, whether you had none, it's becoming a bigger question for providers and for consumers alike. Where do I stand? Where is my immune response? And that's really where Aditxt Core is very unique. Ultimately, when it comes to building a business, to all of our shareholders that are participating in this, ultimately you got to ask yourself a question: is this a needed product? And I can tell you from our point of view, it is. We're seeing great acceptance in the marketplace. Number one. Number two, how do you deploy it? That's what we've been working on. And number three, how do you scale that? How do you create awareness so it's not, so far it's been growing organically through word of mouth. How do we scale that? So the data points I can give you is our team right now is focused on, by the numbers, what it would take to be able to process 1 million Aditxt Cores per year. That will require sales pipeline, of course, but we want to make sure that we understand clearly what it would take to process 1 million Aditxt Cores per year, in the next, 9 months, 18 months, certainly in 2022 and 2023. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of data points of where we see Aditxt Core. Now, we talk a lot about COVID-19. That's really how it started because of the need. But you touched on it in your introduction. Think about your immune response. Would you be interested in understanding whether your immune system is resisting a particular medication that you are taking? That's a huge area that we believe we can address in the future. Would you be interested in understanding if one of your children has susceptibility to type 1 diabetes? That's where Aditxt score can be a useful application. Are we interested in understanding in advance if our immune system is rejecting one of our organs again in advance? This is really where Aditxt score and understanding our immune system by the numbers. COVID-19, and to those shareholders that believe in the company, starting with Aditxt score, you got to ask yourself, based on execution, where can the company be in 2022, 2023, 2025, or 2023, 2030, as an example?
So you touched on something that was beautiful. I love the way you did it. If you had 1 million tests and you charge $60 a test, that's 60 million in revenues. If you net half of that to the bottom line, I'm not talking about grossing it, netting it half to the bottom line, that's 30 million. That puts you cash flow positive. I mean, that's just that's my thinking, not your thinking. But as an analyst, if you have 30 million in profit, that's certainly at your current burn rate, what you're currently spending, it more than covers the company. And that's why, as an analyst, I'm not really fearful of just never ending dilutive raises. You need to do what you need to do right now, but if there's the potential for 1 million tests, that's huge. And we have not talked about cancer. We haven't talked about organ transplant patients, right? There is a host of other uses where, as a physician, I would want to have insight into what my next move with the patient is going to be, and beyond a white blood cell count, right? I mean, the information that doctors are using is pretty basic today to make a lot of these decisions. If they had more information about where patients immunologically are in terms of specific cytokines, I have to believe it impacts their treatment decisions, no?
Yes. So let me again share with you an example that would show how powerful Aditxt score could be in the future. It's not an application that we have today, just to be very clear, but think about cancer patients and imagine, as different medications get tried to see which one our body responds to. Imagine if we can figure out, prescription, which medication may be best for someone, and instead of going through those trials. Imagine if we can figure out if our immune system or a cancer patient's immune system is beginning to reject medication. So they take medication thinking they're getting better, but reality is our immune system is treating it as obviously a foreign object, and it will begin to resist it. Aditxt score, again, as a platform, starting with COVID-19, is showing to be the right innovation at the right time, Jason. And executing and putting out a new innovation does take time, but we've been executing pretty quickly to get to that inflection point, which is revenues and market adaptability.
So, Amro, I have heard that there are other companies who have tried to buy you, or I might say pick you off. They saw the technology, they liked it, and that you've turned them down. I like when I hear that story because it tells me that you see a significant amount of value in the company, and you're not about to just kind of let it get picked off.
I don't know the context, obviously, Jason.
What I mean is there are a lot of diagnostic companies out there who would love to complement their existing technologies with the Aditxt score, right?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
Yes, I believe so.
If you did 1 million tests, and that would be COVID tests this year, right?
It would be from now until end of 2023 to get to that scale.
Okay, but that's primarily around COVID.
It would start with COVID, long COVID, and all of its variants, including Omicron 1 and Omicron 2.
Of course. Okay, good. Well, I mean, that's a nice business if you can get that business going. And let's kind of finish up on diagnostics. If that business is going, and I'm going to come back to it, by 2030, how many other indications do you think Aditxt score will have?
By 2030?
Yeah. If
Okay,
your dream is realized.
Jason, by 2030, I mean, we're talking 8 years from now. I mean, imagine deploying 2 to 3 or even 1 to 2 applications or categories per year. That will give us about 16 to 20, again, based on 1 to 2 per year.
So your vision is that this almost becomes a standard part. I'm going to even say, even if we just restrict it to hospital patients, but obviously it's much bigger than that. I mean, people who have organ transplants are not always in the hospital. But if you were just had a percentage of the organ transplant market, then that's very significant. By the way, how many people do have organ transplants in the United States?
I do have the statistics actually on our slides.
You can just take a guess for us.
No, Jason, I don't want to really throw a number because I have not used that number recently. But
well, I know that it's, you know, probably under 1 million, but it's definitely not 10,000. It's probably around 100,000 and change. Yeah. So it's a significant market.
It's in the hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, that's what I think too. Okay, so tell me a little bit when we move into diabetes. Diabetes is a massive problem in the United States. How can Aditxt help?
Yeah, so specifically type 1 diabetes, which is an autoimmune disorder and an autoimmune disease. And T1D, type 1 diabetes, if we can...
usually in kids, by the way, right?
Usually in kids, exactly. And if we can predict someone's susceptibility, a child's susceptibility to T1D, then all of a sudden you're not only talking about addressable market, you're really talking about every child that wants to understand or you know, their provider and parents want to understand whether or not they're susceptible to T1D in order for them to take a course of action that could change that condition or minimize that condition.
Wow. So you're saying that almost as part of a pediatric annual checkup, you might have the ability to flag juvenile diabetes at a very early onset before there is destruction of the insulin producing or islet cells in the pancreas.
By the pancreas. That's exactly one of our applications that we're working on. And you really begin to see Aditxt score, as I mentioned before. We want to take this concept of reactive testing. Something goes wrong, you go to the doctor, they ship you to a lab to get a test, versus proactive monitoring of our immune system. That is a paradigm shift. And this is why the relationship we bring with Guthrie-Rinker, it really goes beyond a traditional biotech. Imagine Aditxt score part of our, you know, our daily lives, where we begin to think in terms of monitoring our immune system rather than reacting, you know, when something goes wrong. This is really where we see Aditxt score. Look, we are a small company, we're a young company, and I do believe that our inflection point to push the company towards revenue will give us that much more momentum as we build the vision of Aditxt.
Okay, good. What other comments would you like to make on diagnostics before we transition to another topic?
No, I think we covered it pretty well. We talked about the inflection point. We talked about how we need to transition Aditxt score, and of course, Aditxt as a result to revenue generating company where we can show not only revenue, but growth in revenue.
Given the fact that you're very US focused and there's such a need for this, Europe, Asia, even in China. I mean, look at what's happening in Shanghai today. Is
Yeah.
there any effort to broaden this internationally, globally?
Absolutely. This touches on the AI Pharma / Silvera acquisition. This is one of the one of the assets that they would bring, and they frankly they are bringing as we speak. Where how can we take Aditxt core internationally, which does require a little bit of a different approach than, of course, the U.S. market where we are here. It will require key partnerships where they could potentially become a let's say a master distributor or an Aditxt core immune monitoring center in those countries. But yes, we do see significant potential globally for Aditxt core.
Yeah, you imagine 25 million people or 30 million people under lockdown in Shanghai, right? It's hard to imagine that there's anything that Chinese government wouldn't do to not do that. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what you're thinking in terms of acquisitions. And I know that there's a lot of questions swirling around in the marketplace about what is the status of the acquisition, when will it close, what do you get? Talk with me a little bit about that whole process.
So it's important, Jason, to just remind everyone that if we do move forward, and I say if because we've been very diligent when it comes to our acquisitions. I mean, I believe we go way above and beyond what's required to understand what the company is, what revenues are, audited financials, going from non-US GAAP to US GAAP, so on and so forth. So it's important to remind everyone that the majority of Silvera's acquisition, which would be 90%, would require shareholders' approval. This will not be just an executive team decision. It will not only be my decision, it will require shareholders' approval. So right now we've accomplished something really significant with Silvera, and thankful to their leadership that they've been working truly in the spirit of partnership to get us both to where we need to be. If you look at Silvera, what is it that we were looking for? We wanted to establish, just as we've established ourselves on the immune side of things in terms of mapping and reprogramming, we also needed a way to address the pathogen side, the disease-causing agent. Silvera brought or brings to the table an antiviral platform called Favipiravir. As I always, Favipiravir is not a new molecule. It's been around. Favi does bring a safety profile that's known to providers around the world. That's an advantage. They have shown to be able to sell into public health agencies internationally, not in the US. We did announce when the data did not go as well as we all hoped for in the US, that could be attributed to study design. I'm not going to get into that. But that was really never part of the original deal. We were not counting on that. Otherwise, the price tag would have been, frankly, unaffordable for Aditxt. So what the acquisition brings is an antiviral asset, access to distribution channels, and a couple other things that we have not made enough progress on. A couple other areas that we feel will be very strategic for Aditxt. The punchline here is this: the announcement that we made last week truly anchors something really important for us, which is strategic revenue coming from an antimicrobial side of things. I do see a question here on the chat. This is why I keep looking on the right-hand side here. The revenue sharing is key for us because it's one more opportunity for Aditxt to get into revenue in 2022. And to summarize it, it is up to $30 million. The first $14.5 million would apply to the loan, which we also strengthened our collateralization of the loan, and the $15.5 million would come in the form of revenue. But it's a strategic revenue, and now it's aligned with our original objective to establish presence with antimicrobial and to also provide us an opportunity for revenue generating this year.
Good. And let's talk a little bit about the molecule itself. What's its clinical status? in the world, and what's its clinical status in the States?
Yeah. So when you look at the clinical status, and Dr. Richard Kaczynski, their chief medical officer, does an amazing job to really go through the molecule and where it's approved and mechanism of action. But you got to start by looking at it being approved in Japan for influenza. That's a little bit of the history. It was used in different settings for different indications where antiviral drugs were needed. And Silvera took that drug and they got either EUA, compassionate use, or full approval in different countries around outside the US and Canada, outside North America. So that's the status. And I do believe, certainly don't want to speak for them, but I do believe they made that public, that at some point they will have a strategy for FABI to come into the US for COVID and other uses.
Yeah, it's interesting. I see in the chat too, someone's asking about China. You would think China would be scrambling to purchase anything that's an antiviral, although I don't know that people in China are dying from COVID. I don't know. But I wonder, this is an antiviral, and I'm thinking of it like a miniature Tamiflu. And is that how you're looking at it too?
Say again, I'm sorry, Jason.
I'm thinking of it like a mini Tamiflu. Gilead has a Tamiflu. I don't think Tamiflu works very well, but I think if you get it early enough, it seems to prevent viral shedding. And so it reduces the viral load. So you kind of come back from the viral infection faster than you might otherwise.
Jason, I think that's really key that you touch on is, look, this is really where study designs make a huge difference, whether the drug gets, statistical significance or not. At least certainly one of the main keys is when should FABI really be positioned in terms of time frame? Is it 1 or 2 or 3 days after infection? Is it 7 days? Again, and you got to take it from a non-expert in FABI. They do a great job explaining that, but it really is a limited number of days that if you take it within this time frame, it would be most effective and it would show statistical significance.
Amro, a great follow-up to this podcast, and we have to do it, is to do a KOL podcast and talk about mechanism of action, how it works. I can tell you, as someone who was a product manager who lived and launched a drug in Japan, that it's not uncommon to see drugs that are very successful in Japan and they're just not used anywhere else. And they're not used in other places, not because it's a bad drug, but because it never really caught on. And so I am not surprised if in fact this turns out to be a very big drug. And I am not surprised if the paradigm around COVID and flu shifts so that we really start looking at some of the other drugs that were shunned by the media, maybe for political reasons, like hydroxyquinone might be an example. There are many others. And I think that it's very likely we're going to see scientists and researchers go back, right, in case there's another respiratory pandemic, and say, what drugs exist in the armamentarium that have a very safe profile and that can be used either prophylactically or on early onset to prevent the symptoms from cascading to more serious disease, right? That would have been so welcome 2 years ago. Yeah. And we just didn't have it.
I agree, Jason, I agree. And I'll tell you, I mean, you touched on something, and then we're gonna have to turn it over to Alyssa to make sure that we answer some of the questions. I know you and I can
go
have
forever,
this,
right?
But you do touch on something important as far as having an expert. And I don't know if on Zoom we can actually have a quick survey. This is something I truly want to do, where we begin engaging our stakeholders in general, so they can hear firsthand from experts on, on FABI. They can, hear from experts.
Well, listen, Amro, even I, as an analyst, I love speaking with you, but the point comes where I want to say, is this a protease inhibitor? Is it a nucleoside, non-nucleoside? Where is it breaking the viral chain? Is it in intracellular replication? And so and the reason why those details become important is because then biotech analysts like myself and other experts can really begin to assess the risk and the probabilities of success around the drug. And quite honestly, I haven't done the work yet. I mean, I want to see you acquire the company first, right? But I think that is a logical next step for us to start thinking about.
We're happy to arrange for that, Jason. Again, we still have a long way. The acquisition takes a long time. We are, again, I want to remind
Wall Street time. We need to get it done.
Revenue sharing is a big deal for us. Truly, at this stage of the company, was really important for us to anchor. So with that, maybe I can turn it over to Alyssa. Alyssa, for the questions. Again, I'm seeing some in the chat room here, and I know that we have received some. So why don't you go ahead and jump in, Alyssa?
Hi, yes, thank you both. So some of the questions, Jason was asking some great questions throughout. We do have a lot of questions regarding the emergency use authorization applications. So if you could provide an update on that, and if you could provide any directional trends in terms of uptake given the current stage of the pandemic in the US.
Sure. The first one will be quick. We submitted the two EUA applications January 14th. We are operating under lab developed test at this point because that's what the FDA said. As long as we met the deadline, we can continue operating under LDT. We have not heard back from the FDA one way or another. Of course, if we get negative response, we'll have to stop and we'll have to continue on a traditional path of a 510K. And if we hear positive response, obviously that would be great. Or we may simply, maybe they would request additional information. But so far, we have not received any feedback one way or another. The second question, what was the second part of the question?
Can you provide any directional trends in terms of uptake given the current stage of the pandemic in the US?
Positive trend for Aditxt score. As we predicted a couple of years ago, we will transition from infection status focus. That will continue, of course, but the focus is transitioning from infection status to protection status or immune status. We are seeing an uptick from Q4 to Q1, and our goal again is to continue showing growth in Aditxt score adoption in the quarters to come.
Great, thank you. Regarding the EUA, do you have any expectations regarding the time, and does that approval affect the trajectory and strategy of application and marketing?
The first part was no, we have not received any feedback, and we don't really know. I mean, that's reality. We have no idea what the FDA's timeline is. Wish we did, but we don't. As far as the EUA obviously will make a difference one way or another. But again, if we end up not getting the EUA authorization or the EU authorization, we will. We are already planning our 510K. EUA, just everybody understand, it is temporary, understandably so. So for whatever reason we don't get it, it will be a disappointment. I mean, it will be, but we do have plans to move forward with a 510K. The other piece that's really important, EUA only applies to COVID-19. The other Aditxt score applications are lab developed tests that can continue as we plan. That would not. Only COVID-19 is an exception that requires FDA and EUA, just to clarify that.
Great, thank you. And then are there any new channel partners that have joined the company in offering this test?
Yes, we have 27 active channel partners right now, and we are continuing to grow the numbers, and that's why Guthy-Renker's relationship is going to be important for us to grow those numbers.
And then the last question regarding Aditxt score for COVID-19, or just more in general, is how long does the immunity status last, and how often should someone get an Aditxt score again?
Alyssa, excellent question. I am not a physician. I can just share with you some of the data. I mean, truly, the interesting piece is, the interesting, fact is we're all different. I mean, this is why it's important. It is not one size fits all. Right now, I can tell you, generally speaking, we're looking at every quarter, every 90 days, maybe every 6 months. But ultimately, that is the physician's call. If someone is immunocompromised, if someone is going into a surgery, that really changes the equation and the frequency of it. But we are not practicing medicine, and we really position Aditxt score as a way to provide objective data for the decision maker, being the individual. I don't want to call him patient, the individual and their doctors, to make that decision.
I would just jump in and say one thing too, which is, most people have had 3 shots. I don't think I know anyone that's had 4, but we will get there. And the really key question is, if you're reinfected with COVID a year from now, could you become very, very ill? If you could, and your immunity has worn off, then there will be a huge push to be vaccinated. Before I take a 4th shot or a 5th shot, or before I get revaccinated, I'd sure like to know what my immunity is, because that could tell me you really don't need it or you really do need it. And so you could see that if there was a countrywide push to revaccinate, or for a 5th or 4th jab, or a 5th jab, you could see how that could get coupled with an Aditxt score, that if your score is this, yes, we recommend you get the jab.
And really moving forward, I mean, look, if you think about it now, we're hearing that airlines and airports may not require masks after May 2nd, I believe. Now think about it from a consumer point of view. So now your decision, assuming that decision remains, your decision becomes, what is my immune response? And again, for everybody, we do not say whether you're immune or not. No such thing. It's never binary. But what is that level of immune response you have will determine the level of risk you have and how vulnerable you are. We think it's going to be a very important tool moving forward, so individuals can make decisions based on their level of vulnerability to COVID-19, and of course other applications that we talked about that we will deploy in the future.
And imagine if you're exposed and you're exposed, and there was a prophylactic medicine you could take. Doesn't do you any harm, but should you actually contract COVID, it would suppress the virus before it could ever take hold. And that's where you get into the spectrum of Aditxt.
That's exactly, this is why that cohesive approach to immune health, disease-causing agents, as well as our immune side of the equation, mapping and reprogramming, is truly the complete approach to our immune health. Alyssa, there was one question that I saw, and I want to make sure that I address as well here on the chat box, as far as when do you make a decision on reverse split? We're not making that decision right now. This is not something that we're actively discussing. As I mentioned before, I believe we were given until July 18th by NASDAQ, which is the 6-month notice. I cannot tell you what I can't put words in NASDAQ's mouth right now, but we will likely have another 6 months to provide a plan. So this is not something that we are actively discussing. Frankly, my goal is to get the company to be valued where we believe it should be, and address that issue that way. Do we mechanically want to make sure we can do that? Yeah. But is it an active discussion as far as making that decision? It's not.
And so real quick for me, Aditxt, it checks the boxes for what I'm looking for as an analyst. It's a microcap growth story. It's got a paradigm shifting technology, and I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to see the commitment of management, right? And management has to be sincere and committed. I want their interests aligned with my interests, with shareholder interests. And I think we check all of those boxes here. So it's a pleasure covering the stock. If you guys would like to see the report, don't hesitate to pull it off our website. Thanks for allowing me to participate, Amro.
No, we appreciate it, Jason. Thank you very much. Alyssa, I'll kind of turn it over to you. And, before we do the closing remarks, I personally want to thank everybody who participated. I do appreciate you being shareholders and stakeholders. Look, we take our mission seriously. This is why we get up every day to do what we do. We are on a very special mission. It is not easy. We deal with a lot of challenges that we already discussed, but we truly believe as we navigate those challenges, it will lead us to something very, very special that we can deliver to the world and all of our stakeholders, including our shareholders. So thank you again for participating, Jason. Thank you very much. And Alyssa, back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Jason and Amro. This is all the time we have today, and thank you everyone for taking the time to join us for this call. If you have any questions or would like to schedule a follow-up with Aditxt, please reach out to us directly at aditxt@edisongroup.com. Thank you again, and have a good one, everyone.
Thank you.